Welcome to our next episode of the MBR Podcast Summer Series. It's where the people who do the real journalism get to brag about what they've been up to. So in the chair is property and tourism guru Brent Melville, who for his sins, and I'm sure there are many, also has to report on Auckland Council. So Brent, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming in. So look, lots to go on this year. Let's start with the biggest story.
Yes, that was... Look, there are a few.
Don't say it. You got to say it.
There are a few contenders, but there was one obvious standout, and that was Duval.
Yeah.
I'm probably on the same hymn sheet as the rest of the crew by saying, look, it took up a lot of our time.
Yeah.
I think
it took up a lot of your time.
It took up a lot of my time. It has taken up a lot of my time, probably for the last few years.
Yeah.
I guess the highlight of that was being first on the scene.
So tell me about that. I mean, the tip-off came in and out the door you went. I saw you running.
Yeah, I was literally hoofing it out the door.
You were.
Except I didn't really know exactly where it was, so I had to kind of find that detail out on the way.
Yeah.
But we were fortunate enough to run into a very amenable coffee man across the street from the house who had sort of seen it all go down, and he was very useful.
Yes.
He said he had to Google the FMA, so, as of course I had on the way. And yes, we were the first down the pathway, and Kenyon was there, and Kenyon Clark was there.
Yep.
And sort of just basically indicated that we would need to leave the premises shortly thereafter, which we did. But
yes,
we managed to get a little bit of footage, managed to file a story fairly quickly, and that was kind of the start of the receivership, and then what eventually culminated in the statutory management of the company. So
you've done a lot of reporting on that. It has been a huge story, and there's probably a long way to go, but we can talk about that soon. But there's, besides Duval and Kenyon and Charlotte Clark, there's got to be some other players in the property sector which have caught your eye this year.
Indeed. Look, it's been a tough year for commercial property, for residential property developers. We've had interest rates tracking up to levels not seen since 2018 thereabouts, probably even earlier. One of those was, look, there were some old faces that sort of made appearances.
Such as?
Terry Serapisos.
Oh, yes.
Came back onto the scene. In his case, he was kind of trying to protect his family home from another developer called Black Robin, Black Robin Equity. And that was a chap by the name of David Wigmore, who was left as the sole director after being ostensibly abandoned by Jasmine Yao, who was his former valuer in crime.
Right. Valuer in crime.
Valuer in crime. So they had done a couple of questionable property deals a few years back. Again, a lot of those predicated on low interest rate regime.
Yeah.
Didn't quite work out the way they'd thought. One of those was a deal they'd constructed with the Serapisos family home in Wellington.
Okay.
That fell down into the toilet, and Terry ended up in court.
Okay. And look, there's golf. Obviously, you like golf, but there's also Golf Harbour as well. Is this Greg Oliver? I'm trying to work, because I don't know Greg Oliver, but he seems to have been someone that has been around the property game for a while.
Yeah, Greg is an Auckland developer who was stricken from directorships and not able to manage any companies for a period of 4 years. I think that was reduced to 3 years, and it actually ended in October this year.
Okay.
So he started jumping onto a few boards again. He's been in court as a result of the Gulf Harbour deal, which is the Whangaparoa golf course.
Yes.
Now that's a 80-hectare course that they bought in 2021. He and his cohort, Wayne Bailey. Wayne was a friend of his and also his Christchurch-based accountant.
Right.
Wayne sort of took the mantle of all of his directorships when Greg was banned as being a director.
Yeah.
Something like 45 companies I counted that he was a director of.
That's a lot.
I don't think Greg's going to go back onto all of those boards. But The problem with that property is it's got a 999-year encumbrance, which the council has deemed will then always be a golf course during that 1,000-year period.
So you can't do anything with it. Is that what that means?
Correct.
Huh.
Yeah, you
Right.
can, but it has to be related to golf, or it can be. You can construct a clubhouse. You can upgrade the current facilities.
But it's not operating as a golf course now, is it?
No, because what actually happened was during the process of closing the clubhouse, there was a lot of vandalism and damage, and the clubhouse itself actually burned down, which added to Greg and Wayne's woes because the council had to come and clean it up at a cost of $200,000.
Which they are going to on charge to them.
Which they will on charge,
yep.
and they will be in court on that one.
Right.
Also, they owe somewhere in the vicinity of $60 million for the course itself.
Wow.
To 1543 Capital, which another company involved in. Yes.
Oh, so everybody joins hands in the property game.
It is a lot of kumbaya. In that,
Kumbaya, love it. Okay. Let's move on from property, and we are going to talk people who haven't had these people haven't had a great year, but others, individuals who haven't had a great year. And it's really interesting, this one that you've been reporting on. This is the Ports of Auckland former CEO, Tony Gibson, hasn't had a great year.
No, he hasn't had a good couple of years. He actually was effectively kicked out of Port of Auckland by the council a few years ago as a result of some failings around the automation process there, which cost the company or the port itself $60 million plus.
Yep.
But he then in 2020 there was a one of three fatalities at the port that had occurred over the prior in years, consequent years, and he was then held liable under a court act, sort of a bit of a tightening of the health and safety regime. That was under the Health and Safety at Work Act 2015.
And that's really caught the eye of company directors and company managers, hasn't it?
Absolutely. It's a sort of sets a very high standard for these directors, and they'll be looking over their shoulder going forward. I don't know what Mr. Gibson is going to, whether he's going to appeal it. I think common sentiment from the legal people I've spoken to is that he will, given that it actually sets a whole new kind of bar for that kind of thing, and he's on a sort of a test bed of legal of legal kind of decision making, and it's probably cost Maritime NZ the sort of health and safety regime over $1 million in legal fees thus far. The maximum penalty that Mr. Gibson would be fined would be $300,000, I think.
Right. So
excluding his legal costs.
Yeah. So this is not a charge that he's been found guilty of that could lead to prison, or it's not even reckless. It's a possible monetary fine.
It is.
But is there a tie-in here? Let's talk about something that Elsie reported on. And this is, I don't know the case, but his name is Ron Salter, and he was the boss of, what kind of company was he the boss of? And why did the police pursue him over health and safety?
Yeah, Salter ran a Auckland-based recycling sort of yard.
Okay.
So he would do gases and reconstitute certain processing materials that had come off building sites and other things. Unfortunately, what happened in his case is that in 2017, he had a 24-year-old worker on his site killed in an explosion, which with a gas that wasn't necessarily. He was actually welding a piece of equipment that held gas, and the gas hadn't actually been mandated as volatile under any kind of health and safety regime or WorkSafe indication. Unfortunately, the man died, and he was then subsequently had to pay under a WorkSafe legal action. I think he paid $400,000,
right,
including reparation.
Okay.
To the family. Subsequent to that, once he'd already paid all of that, he was taken to task by the police commissioner under the Proceeds of Crime Act for upwards of $11 million in terms of his personal assets.
Wow.
It's a family business.
So that's a really interesting link there. You get prosecuted under a failing on health and safety laws, and yet if you're a business owner you can then be pursued for proceeds of crime. So the assets from the business. And
it was
and
an
your personal
act.
assets.
It was an act originally intended for organised crime, for gangs, and for drug money, and a way of for the police.
We're used to seeing the Harleys and the cars and those kinds of things proceeded as a result of this act.
Yeah. So it's expanded its remit in terms of, business people that primarily people that own the business and actually directly benefit from areas that they are seen to be very out of favor with health and safety rules. So I've actually spoken to lawyers about this subsequently. I was asking them whether Tony Gibson, for example, might fall under that under that same category. I said it's highly unlikely, given that he was a officer of the company. However, he wasn't the owner of the port.
Well, does that mean the ports of Auckland should be pursued for proceeds of crime?
It does beg the question, so perhaps we can look at that next year. But I mean, it's Salter settled eventually for $4 million, just really to finish off the case. And
he's been going since 2017.
For 9 years.
All right, let's quick mention of some winners. You think from this year? What are some stories where you won or where the NBR won, apart from Taval?
I don't know if NBR won. We're always winners, just in terms of the sheer reporting kind of winners and losers category. But look, I think if I could pick one entity that is probably I'd categorize as a winner this year, I mean, it's a turnaround of and ironically, given our discussion around Gibson, would be the Port of Auckland for me. That's my kind of pick for the year. You've got a guy in charge there by the name of Roger Gray. He has changed things. He's turned things around with the union. He's turned things around with otherwise potentially difficult mayor of Auckland in terms of, getting to the point where they're happy with their dividend. They are forecasting upwards of $1.2 billion in the course of the next 10 years in terms of their return to the council. They have to undergo some structural change over there.
Yep.
But I think they're well on their way to doing that. And it's very much a success case. So I do look at ports. So I mean that particular story this year is definitely one of the highlights.
Okay, I do want to go on to honourable mentions for stories, whether they're positive or negative. It's part of the all round, which I'm not sure everybody else wants. And this is reporting on organisations like Watercare and Vector and what they're doing. So let's talk the story that you did on Watercare just recently. Just summarise that. That was fascinating.
Watercare and both of them are actually looking at massive increases in terms of their rates. There's what's called a development contribution as well.
Yeah.
Watercare's other issue is that they have a limited supply of hookups to their current network.
Yeah.
So they, after a lot of pressure from developers and other interest groups, they eventually published what they call a red zone map over the course of the last. When did they publish that? I published that in last month only, and after a lot of pressure. They purportedly had that information in the public domain prior to that. But
what does this show, this red zone map?
It shows that what it shows is that developers who potentially invest, buy land and build properties do not necessarily have the right to hook up to the network, the water network, either storm water or new water, even if they've got resource consent. Because what the issue is, one of the issues is that Watercare is not talking to the council.
So there's sorry to use the word connection or disconnect here in this, but really, so a developer who's poured millions into land and actual buildings and consent comes to build it and then realises they've got no water or sewage.
Which can reduce the value of their investment.
I would imagine it does.
Yeah. Because a house without water is not much.
Yeah, no.
So that, and then the story around Vector is a similar one. Vector is just ballooning their costs out in terms of to cover what they believe is a gold mine for them.
I do suspect you quite enjoy taking these people to task when you find these things out. You got to admit that.
It's a calling.
It's a calling.
You have to look. I mean, it's based on on verbatim comments from people, and people, developers take risks. They do, and they're in that kind of part of the market. They run up against bureaucracy that isn't necessarily working, and some of them are a little bit afraid to actually talk about it. And you'll find a lot of the stories I do, even where you're talking about Duval or some of the other folks, they're often signed up to non-disclosures.
Yep.
And I can't actually name them.
Yep.
However, they're on the record. They've talked to me, and they've got a story to tell. So, I find that the Vectors of the world and the Watercares of the world, they're receptive to those kind of discussions. They're not obviously trying to hide things, but there are stories behind the scenes, and they don't necessarily. They're trying to deal within the confines of a particular bureaucracy, and it's not working.
Yep. All right. I just very quickly, some headlines to look out for 2025. What are you looking at?
I think, we can't go far away from interest rates.
Yeah.
The market's going to strengthen in the property sector. There's a lot of developments that have been essentially put on hold until rates start getting in a more favorable territory. That's on the commercial side.
Yep.
I spoke to a property analyst this morning, and he was saying that he believes the industrial and logistics part of the market's going to start climbing out of it first. We've seen $4 billion less expenditure on transactions over the course of the last year alone than the prior year. And that's a significant chunk out of it, from 10 billion down to 6 billion.
Right.
In terms of those commercial deals.
So the commercial property market could be
absolutely
climbing out
one to watch.
And
probably a little bit of residential perk up. I wouldn't suggest that it's a massive recovery. It'll be slow.
Yeah.
From what I've heard.
Yeah.
And that again is predicated on interest rates coming down and developers and projects sort of getting the green light and going ahead.
Okay. All right, Brent. Well, we're just going to wrap that up. That's been a massive year for you. I hope you find some time to swap your sort of construction hard hat reporting for something like a stylish fedora made of straw, out in the sunshine. Can you picture yourself doing that?
Possibly a fishing.
Fishing.
We'll see where we go.
Okay. I love that image. Thanks for coming on the pod.
Thank you, Simon.